Hi, everyone. This is Reed Jacobs with Faith and Hope Hospice, bringing you another COVID conversation. Today, we're talking with Reed Vanderberg about the impacts of COVID on the LGBTQ community. Welcome, Reed.
Thank you.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and the work you do?
Yeah, I'm a former therapist. I worked with about 450 clients who were all asking the question, how do I want to live my life in the context of gender identity? And that was about 99% of my client base, either them or their family members or partners, wondering how trans identity was going to play out for them. And the reason that it was such a high percentage of my practice is because they all knew going in that I was trans myself. This is what 25 years in transition looks like. I started my own personal process in 1995, and I've just done various aspects of this work ever since.
Getting started, what are some common challenges and unique needs of LGBTQ individuals accessing healthcare?
Yeah. Well, those who are lesbian or gay commonly deal, excuse me, with misassumptions about the nature of their relationships. For example, paperwork might ask women for their history with birth control. Gay men still can't donate blood, a remnant of the AIDS epidemic. Those who are bisexual, they're always invisible, no matter what. They're assumed to be straight if their partner is opposite sex. They're assumed to be gay or lesbian if they're in a same-sex relationship. So when you're accessing healthcare systems, the paperwork is usually the first thing you encounter. And if you're not given options to allow you to state the nature of your relationship, you may end up having to spend half your allotted 15 minutes with a new doctor explaining who you are. Now, those who are trans face a different set of challenges. Where are they in transition? The paperwork will ask for M or F, male or female. What do they put if they're about to transition, but they haven't quite yet started with any of the physical or legal processes? Then what happens on their next visit? If they transitioned 5 years ago and checked the box associated with their new gender, will the medical personnel make misassumptions about their body configuration? Absolutely. For instance, the trans man who checks the male box may very well need a pap smear and has no need of a prostate exam. A better way to put it on paperwork is male, female, is this the gender on your original birth certificate? This captures sufficient information to go on from there, asking the right questions. And putting it this way cues the trans person that this is one medical office that gets it, that recognizes trans identity as a thing, and might have a clue how to effectively treat trans people, medically and socially.
What are some common concerns that this community face with severe illness or at end of life?
For lesbians and gay men, are their relationships treated with respect and dignity? Are their partners included, as a straight partner would be? Despite legalities, some staff may disapprove of the relationship and might convey this through tone of voice and body language at precisely a time when the partners need support most. All of this community, LGBT plus, is highly attuned to disapproval. It can't be hidden. I suppose you could call it another facet of gaydar, the capacity of lesbians and gay men to spot each other. Though trans people aren't spotted a lot of the time, nevertheless, we all develop a fine sense of social safety that allows us to instantly spot disapproval. Now, for bisexual people, their invisibility is always an issue. However, the illness will be front and center in their minds, not exactly how others are categorizing their identity, because this invisibility is nothing new to them. That said, if they're in a same-sex relationship, they'll face the same issues as lesbians or gay men. Now, for trans people, loss of privacy and dignity, exposure of their bodies for all to see, this is a community that passes along the most egregious stories. The stories of respect and fair treatment are not the focus. The red flag stories are. In 1995, a Black trans woman in Washington, D.C. died after a car accident. Paramedics arrived and began treating her, and when they realized she was a trans woman, they stepped back and started mocking her, and she died. Her mother was later awarded over $2 million in a wrongful death suit. Now, I was a therapist who worked with hundreds of trans clients. One trans woman client was ecstatic after finishing recovery from lower surgery, and she said, at least now if I get arrested for drunk driving, I won't get thrown in with the guys. And this was from someone who doesn't even drink. And regarding end-of-life care, trans people fear that same treatment Tyra Hunter was subjected to in 1995, mocking and lack of treatment. Their fear is they won't be cared for at all. Now, some trans people identify as lesbian or gay, but in a medical setting, if they're the patient, it is their trans identity that will be uppermost in their minds as being a source of possible mistreatment. If the trans person is the partner, they may worry that their being trans might spill over into ill treatment of their seriously ill partner. Now, I'm not saying these kinds of fears become reality most of the time, but they're on the minds of LGBT community members dealing with the medical system under serious and traumatic circumstances.
Mm. Well, even it feels like, especially in Southern California, Faith and Hope Hospices in Pasadena, we serve the greater Los Angeles area. There's a lot of diversity here. It's a lot, it seems to be a lot less discrimination against gays and lesbians. Like you were saying, bisexuals tend to go unnoticed. But it sounds like the trans community may still be getting a lot more discrimination, or just the same level as historically.
Yes, trans people are about 50 years behind lesbian and gay people in terms of civil rights and focusing on civil rights.
The community has a long history of discrimination. What role does discrimination or fear of discrimination play in individuals and their families with life-limiting illness?
Yeah. Well, over the years, this community has entered various professions quite deliberately with an intention of serving their own. And one major reason is because they haven't felt well served by members of these professions in the past. Doctors of all kinds, lawyers, therapists, massage therapists, personal trainers. Folks who are LGBT often prefer to access professionals who share their identity. If there isn't someone sharing their exact identity, if they can't find someone, they'll ask around amongst their friends who share their identity, wanting a referral. In emergency situations, friends will step up. A few years ago, a prominent trans woman here in Portland had sudden serious heart issues crop up. She wasn't in a position to advocate for herself. 5 or 6 prominent trans people stuck by her every step of the way as she was examined by various doctors. And if they couldn't be in the room, they were right outside. One doctor continually misgendered this trans woman, which was noted by those advocating for her. They reported the doctor, who was given a formal reprimand. But what would have happened in the case of a less prominent trans person? The fear is nothing. No repercussion for misgendering, no respect, maybe inadequate treatment. Now, this trajectory is less common today than in 1995, but it still happens often enough that it's not paranoia to expect it. Trans people are generally pleasantly surprised when they are treated with respect.
Oh, that saddens me that the expectation is so much that they won't be treated badly, that it feels so good when they are treated well or even normally.
Yeah, and just to add to that story a little bit, that incident here locally with that trans woman happened 2 years ago. That is not ancient history.
Oh, that is, yeah, it's still fresh and sounds like 50 years behind, like you were saying.
Yeah.
What new challenges do you think the community is facing from COVID and the pandemic?
Well, social isolation, excuse me, is big for those trans people who've just started transition. It's a highly social process of learning a new gender role, and resocialization is virtually impossible without being able to socially connect with people. How can you see how others are reacting to you when everyone's wearing a mask and fleeing each other's proximity? And hormones induce a feeling of centeredness and rightness. Finally, the trans person says, and then they're quarantined. Starting hormones induces a revisitation of puberty, a second adolescence with no chance to experience the social of it. That's a recipe for frustrated depression. And even those who are introverts feel the isolation. For those who are extroverts, adding a second puberty to the mix enhances the feeling of climbing the walls. Now, those who are gay or lesbian generally have a well-established community, not only a larger circle, a larger community, but a circle of friends who really see them for who they are. The nature of living a marginalized identity lends itself to forming deeper friendships. And these can sustain people even through quarantine, as long as they can connect. One lesbian friend of mine, 86 years old, she told me, I wasn't all that comfortable with my computer before COVID. I did email, but not much more than that. Now I've had to learn Zoom, and I've been amazed at what my computer can do. I had no idea. Now I've taken a class at my senior center by Zoom, and I'm on Facebook. I've reconnected with friends I lost touch with 50 years ago, a silver lining of COVID. Now, for those quarantined with unsupportive family, Zoom with friends may be a godsend. For those without internet access, being out and about, even masked, may be preferable to being at home. Not such a bad thing in summer if you're in the northern parts of the US. Who knows how this is going to play out once winter rolls around again, our first COVID winter. I hope everyone has had a chance by then to establish whatever support systems are going to work for them, because in many parts of the country, being outside in winter just isn't possible. Now, the situation is reversed in some southern parts of the US, too hot in the summer.
And I know I have heard a lot of people saying that they're so glad to have this extra time with their family. They're connecting with their kids in ways that they haven't been able to before, when everyone's been busy with work and soccer and all the other things that fill up our day. And for a lot of people that has been positive, but for a lot of the people in this community who don't have supportive families, maybe they feel like they've had to go back in the closet, or they don't feel safe in their own home, the family around them.
Yeah, this is especially a problem because when I came of age, people who were in high school, middle school, they weren't coming out. They might understand who they were, but they didn't necessarily tell anyone. And these days, they're starting to tell people at younger ages who they are. So if you then find yourself quarantined with family that's a mixed bag of support, what do you do with that? And that's a difficult one. And I'm really not sure how the adolescents are handling this. I know they're connecting with each other, but whether there are formal ways, like are the GSAs in the high schools, are they still active in forming social groups? I would hope so.
It seems like the younger generation now is so well connected, and their digital presence is just part of who they are. So hopefully they're still able to maintain those connections.
Yeah, I hear ads on the radio constantly for various internet providers advertising you have control over your internet now. You can control who has access and when. And the thought that crosses my mind when I hear those ads is the unsupportive family with the LGBT adolescent at home, and do they actually have their internet access or not? Those are the kinds of thoughts I have, which are not at all the intention of the advertisers, but that's where I go with it because I'm part of this community.
All the people I work with, and for everyone in general, I recommend having advanced directives. So documents that say who you want to make medical decisions for you if you're not able to, what kind of medical decisions you want them to make. What role do advanced directives play for this community?
These are crucial, especially for peace of mind. Having systems in place with all the I's dotted, the T's crossed, makes it less likely that unsupportive staff will be able to prevent a lesbian from being at her wife's bedside as she dies, for example, though she might still have to advocate for her own presence. But these days, most discrimination isn't this overt. In this day and age, it would be more likely minimizing the importance of their relationship to each other, not seeing their love as being as deep and true as a straight couple. And this may lead to staff not turning to the partner for direction, but asking instead, is there family we should contact, or something like that. Now, if they've been open about their identity for a long time, gay men and lesbians will remember the time when this sort of paperwork was necessary for them to have any rights at all. Now, with same-sex marriage legal, there are more rights accruing to them automatically if they're married, and they don't take this for granted. So many will put in place systems they might not need to legally, but again, they don't take these rights for granted. Now, trans people, are their names and pronouns accurate? Is there any undesired use of their birth name? Are they misgendered, either in writing or by spoken reference? If the legal name change isn't complete in all systems, is there any attempt by staff to help facilitate these changes before end of life? Do they have family visiting that hasn't accepted the transition and is misgendering the trans person or using the wrong name? It really would behoove staff to have proactive training in this arena before they're faced with the real life situation.
Yeah, so even though marriage is legal for same-sex couples, it can feel tenuous, and is this, yes, technically I have these rights, but are they going to be respected?
Yeah, now that's especially when the end of life you're talking about is someone who's older. Now, if it's someone who's younger, maybe a 35-year-old dying of cancer, they may very well take these rights more for granted. But the person who's 86 and in hospice, something of that sort, they certainly don't take these rights for granted.
How can healthcare professionals help this community at end of life?
Respect identity, respect relationship. Often there are a few biological family members who are not supportive of identity or relationship. The LGBT person is the one who counts here, supporting them, not their family member. Let their friends and loved ones in. Don't automatically look to biological relationship as a measure of who's important to involve in this process. Family of choice is what counts. If the dying person is fortunate, this family of choice will include some biological relatives, but it might not.
One of the things I really like about hospice is we're there for the patient and their family, and it's however they identify family.
Perfect.
Yeah. And then I always like to end with this question, and I don't know if there's always something good that can come out of it, but is there something good that can come out of COVID-19 for this community?
Well, really for all people, but looking at this community in particular, there's less taking each other for granted. Connection by Zoom has helped many trans people relax at home, not having to run the gauntlet. They don't have to be out and about in the world being misgendered. That's the silver lining to the frustration of not being able to be social when they finally feel congruent enough to want to be. Now, I sing in a large chorus, and though I miss singing intensely, I've also been attending regular Zoom socials, maybe 10 to 12 choristers at a time. This is a gay men's chorus. I've become closer friends with some than is generally possible in chorus. 15 minutes at break doesn't allow for more than, hi, how are you doing? But a 2-hour Zoom social? And 2 members of my chorus are now finding they'd like to date each other. Not sure how that's going to work under quarantine, but in rehearsal, it's likely they might never have met. The baritone and bass sections are 50 feet apart during regular rehearsals. And people like me are able to connect to more people since so many presentations and such are happening beyond locally via Zoom. The opportunity for this Q&A would probably not have arisen if it weren't for COVID.
Yeah, that's definitely true. We're doing this whole series because of COVID. And I think it's going to be helpful beyond COVID. So yeah.
And I really think that Zoom is not going to go away even after COVID's gone away. I think this sort of thing will still be happening. It's connecting people across broader networks than were ever possible before.
Yeah, and the technology has been there for a while, but it hadn't been adopted, I think partly because we didn't know how useful it could be. Now we see it, and I don't think we'll let that go. I thank you for being with us today and answering these questions and sharing your insight. I certainly do appreciate it.
My pleasure.